Hey everybody, I wanted to take some time today and talk to you about different types of research. Now, as you know, as part of our EDD program here at Morehead State, we don't delve into, we don't have a research heavy series of courses. So, for example, when I took my coursework for my doctorate, I had an ethnography class, I had a qualitative research class, I had a research methodology class, then I had three stats classes. That was my research series. Um, Here at Morehead State, we have practitioner scholars, and we're not giving you that heavy dose of research. However, to be a practitioner scholar, we need to be able to consume research and understand it a little bit better or at all to be able to know if what we're reading, if the research we're consuming is actually beneficial or not. So today in this video, I'm going to just talk very briefly about four types of research. And these four types of research, they're the four um, basic uh, categories that you will be able to put a research study in. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about each. This is not meant to be exhaustive. I will have other resources available to you in Blackboard. Some of these words you may or may not have heard, but I'm just going to try to give you an overview enough so that you can then fill in the gaps where you need them. So, first of all, when we first talk about research, the first two types that we immediately hear are qualitative research and quantitative research. Qualitative and quantitative. Um, Quantitative is exactly what it sounds like. Quantitative research um, has to do with the numbers and the statistics. Now, I've got some notes up here on another screen I'm going to kind of be looking for and referring to back and forth so I can kind of give you the broad overview that you need. So, quantitative research, the purpose of quantitative research, the reason why they run those statistics is they're trying to take whatever their intervention is and they're going to try to use that to predict what may or may not happen. So, if you're incorporating an intervention in, you want to say if we do this intervention, then we predict that there may be this type of a correlation. Um, when I took my statistics classes and my research classes, they explained to me, and it stuck with me all this time, that when you're dealing with quantitative research, we're never able to fully and 100% um, explain human behavior or predict human behavior. So when you do quantitative research, you're trying to explain this much. So if I take human beings and I put them in this situation and I affect this one variable, can I predict what the outcome is going to be from there? So because of that, um, the environments in a quantitative research study are strictly controlled. You try to have very identical, generally, a control group and a treatment group, where everything is the exact same with the exception of the treatment, so that you can see what a difference it makes. The measurement again is standardized. It's a lot of statistics. It's very structured research. It seems inflexible to a lot of people because you are just, getting to the nitty gritty. Um, Data collection strategies are generally you can do administration of tests, and questionnaires. There are some observations and some interviews and focus groups um, to try to get at that, but really in the quantitative, you're dealing mainly with kind of that administration of a test, and we're going to run a statistical analysis on the numbers. Um, the numbers are the key. The numbers are the key. And that's how you remember quantitative. If you see numbers in a research study and there's a chart and there's all these numbers everywhere and it's saying statistical significance or correlation or something like that, you're dealing with a quantitative study. Um, and the purpose behind a quantitative study is to try to generalize. So they'll talk about their N number, capital N number, which is their number of participants. And generally they'll like to see at least 100, an N of 100. If you can say you have an N of 100, then they say that's a pretty good population that you should be able to generalize to. So if you, they say 100 people should be a representative enough sample that you can accurately predict. So if you see an N of 6 and they're running statistics, that's kind of janky. That's not really very good research design. So quantitative research, again, deals with statistical analysis. It's very controlled, and they're trying to generalize the results further and generalize out. On the other hand, we have qualitative, which I don't want you to get confused. You know, quantitative can sound like quantity, numbers. We get that. Qualitative does not mean quality. Both can be quality research. But qualitative research is much more kind of a holistic view. It's where you see things like the controlled setting is not important. They're getting in there and doing things like ethnographies, histories, phenomenologies, case studies, things of this nature. So they're immersing themselves somehow into a group, and that can mean immersing themselves directly within the group, or they can be an accepted or allowed observer within the group. I did an ethnography when I was in my qualitative research class. I did an ethnography of locksmiths in the town where we were living, in the town where I was at. My brother-in-law was a locksmith, and so I immersed myself. I went to work for him for 3 days. Went to work with him for 3 days, and all I did was follow him around. Now he and I obviously talked in the car and stuff, but I just followed him around and kind of took notes on what I saw, what happened. I didn't interfere, and based on what I saw in the interactions, and I talked to the other locksmiths who worked at the shop, and based on all of that, then I went back and sat down with my notes, and I started looking at what does this tell me about locksmiths? What conclusions can I draw based on what I read? Now, my basic conclusion of that particular thing was that locksmiths have to be pretty moral people because they can get in anywhere. They just really can get in anywhere, and I saw them making a lot of exceptions for people who perhaps couldn't pay, and then I also saw them, if people were jerks to them, that also affected the kind of service that they got. But they're very moral people, and they would have to be to do the job that they're doing. But again, qualitative research, generally instead of reporting numbers, it's narrative. You're telling a story. You're saying this happened and this happened, and then this really interesting thing happened, and here's what I think it means. A lot of times, again, these are very interviews and focus groups, but they're much more unstructured, informal, and qualitative research. I get them mixed up in my mouth sometimes. Qualitative research, they are taking extensive field notes so they can refer back to what happened and what they saw and things of that nature. Now, the data, instead of being numbers, are the words that they take down. And where we talked about in quantitative, they want to generalize out. We've got an N of 100, so I can generalize this out. Really, in qualitative, this is my phrasing. I've never heard anybody else say this. My understanding of qualitative is that I always say it's generalizable to the one. So, for example, instead of generalizing it out to 100 people, I say this story, this conclusion only works for the people that I've talked to, for this particular person. So you know what? I don't know if all locksmiths are moral. I don't know if all locksmiths are trustworthy, but I know that the ones that I worked with, the ones that I did my ethnography on, I know that they were. So I can't say that all locksmiths are, but I can say that the ones that I worked with were. So we have quantitative, think numbers, Qualitative, think words. Now the next one that's the natural extension of those two is mixed methods. What's mixed methods research? Well, it's just that. We're mixing methods. So it might be it might have a quantitative component, so they've run some statistics, right? But then they're going to have a qualitative component as well. So they might run some statistics, get some sort of result that they find is interesting, then they might go back and interview some people or have something from there and then do a narrative on that. So they're mixing the two. Now, it actually, and I'm not going to get into the details because I think you get it later on in 811, but actually you can design your mixed method study to be qualitative first and then that leads to the quantitative, or quantitative first and that leads to the qualitative. Now, in my own personal experience, I have done the quantitative first and that led to the qualitative more than I've done the other. I think a good example of something that I've done recently that is mixed methods has been the implementation of the iPads at Mason County. When we were very heavy in collecting that data, we were collecting quantitative data on the MSLQ, trying to measure motivation with the students, but we were conducting focus groups and seeing what the students had to say, what was the story they were telling. So we had a mixed methods study going on. Now, finally, the fourth type of research that really, and it's the one that I think is the most applicable really to what we do in our particular program here at Morehead State, and that's action research. All right, now this the classes, you have classes in the program called action research and grant writing. It's important to know that action research really can kind of look like these others, but it's really the place where you're coming from. If I'm doing quantitative or qualitative research, I'm a researcher and I'm going into it. Research is my main focus. Okay? I'm going into a situation as a researcher with a hypothesis that I want tested, and I'm looking for a research outcome. Action research is more kind of a participant-based research, kind of a community of practice thing, or an in-the-trenches thing. Think of a teacher who, in his or her classroom, has heard that this particular program really helps improve math scores. So they've decided they're going to take this program and implement it with their students, and they're going to see if it works. Or they have maybe heard that pen pals in another country help, students write better or whatever, and they're going to kind of do this in the trenches, participant community of practice. We're in this together, kind of look at things and see what happens. It's really practical and really applied. That's action research. Now, you can still collect data, and run numbers. You can still do focus groups and all that stuff, but it's the intent and the where it's coming from that, in my opinion, really makes it action research. So you've got four types there. You've got quantitative, numbers, qualitative, words, mixed methods, those two together, and then action research, which is that in the trenches, community of practice based. So as you go through and as you look at research, as you try to build a literature review, as you try to determine your own methodology for your own research for your capstones, this is one of the decisions you're going to have to make. And as you read research, you're going to have to look at it and go, okay, is this quantitative? Is this qualitative? What does that mean? Other parts of the class, we're going to talk about things like threats to validity, where you can look at it and you go, I don't think they addressed that issue that should be there. But for right now, I want you being able to identify those four things. Now, on top of that, when you look at a article to include in your literature review, the other thing that you need to consider are two things. Is it a primary source or a secondary source, right? We should know what that is. Primary source, you're quoting the article. A secondary source, you're quoting an article that's quoting the article. So in other words, if you're quoting an article that I wrote directly, that's a primary source. However, if you've seen someone else quoting me, and you're quoting them quoting me, that's a secondary source. It's always better to have a primary source, okay? The other thing when we look at research, especially published research, we're going to look at peer-reviewed versus editorial reviewed, okay? Now, peer-reviewed means that it has been reviewed by other researchers in the field who have read it, have looked at the writing, they've looked at the write-up, they've looked at the methodology, and they've said, oh, okay, this works. Or, and have sent generally back rounds of revisions for it to get published. So, for example, there are 3 different journals that I currently review fairly often for them. One is the Tech Trends, one is Educational Technology Research and Development, and the other is Journal Computing and Higher Education. So they'll send me an invitation to review. I'll download an article and I'll read it just like I would read for an assignment in your class. I'll check the writing. I'll look at their methodology. If they say, okay, if they're setting up a quantitative study, but their methodology doesn't ring right with that, or if the write-up of the statistics is wrong, then I need to comment back on that, because ultimately I help the editor make a decision. I make a recommendation back to the editor: accept this article for publication or reject. And now normally there are stages in there, which is accept with revisions or accept with major revisions. But that's my job as a reviewer. So if it's been peer reviewed or blind reviewed, you'll hear it called as well, it's been sent out and vetted by other experts in the field. Editorial review, on the other hand, is different. Editorial review is when you send something in to get published, and it doesn't go out blind review. The editor just gets it, reads it over, makes sure that it's okay, and then says okay and publishes it. An example of that would be, I've written a couple of book reviews, right, for Tech Trends. And when the editor contacts me, hey, got this book, you willing to review it? Sure. I read the book, I write up my review, I send it into the editor. He does not send it out to reviewers. Instead, he reads it over, makes sure that it's okay, that it's in the word count and everything, and then he goes ahead and publishes. So it's reviewed only by the editor. So which is better? Which do you want? Peer-reviewed or editorial reviewed? Well, you want peer-reviewed. You want peer-reviewed or blind reviewed because, again, it's been vetted by outside scholars, by outside experts. So I know this is a ton in this one particular video, but that's okay. So we've covered 2 different things. Types of research: quantitative numbers, qualitative words, mixed methods, mixture, and action research, community practice in the trenches. Then we've covered types of articles that we can get. Primary versus secondary. Primary is the original one. Secondary is somebody quoting the original one. You want primary. And then you've got editorial reviewed versus peer reviewed. Editorial reviewed does not go out to experts. Peer reviewed does. You want peer reviewed. So when you're conducting a literature search to write a literature review, or you're trying to publish, the very best thing for you is to find blind reviewed or peer reviewed primary sources. Okay. Now from there, whether or not they're any particular type of research doesn't really matter. It's just whatever fits what you're doing. And sometimes you can find, if you're lucky, you'll find when you're doing your literature review search, one that will set up your methodology for you, a study that's somewhat similar to what you did. So at any rate, that's what you need to know. That's the basics. Like I said, you'll get more on this as we go, but that's the introduction. Good luck, and I'll see you guys online.